My ex-husband stormed into my brother's will reading and shouted, "I deserve my 2 million cut!" He grabbed the pen, signed the papers without even reading them, and walked out laughing like he had won. The next day at the bank, the lawyer slid the document across the desk. My ex-husband's face turned white when he realized what he had signed. Everything went to me. If this story already has you hooked, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. I love hearing from all of you. I never thought my brother's passing would end with a scene like this. His name was James, my younger brother, only 40 years old, and one of the kindest people I've ever known. Losing him broke my heart, and sitting in that quiet law office for the will reading felt heavy and painful. The polished wooden table, the stacks of papers, the lawyer's calm voice, none of it could cover the ache in my chest. I tried to focus on James's memory, on the good years we shared. He had always been my protector, the one who told me to stay strong through my messy divorce. He had never trusted Victor, my ex-husband, and he made sure I knew I deserved better than the man who had drained me emotionally and financially. Victor and I had divorced years ago, but he never left my life completely. He had a way of showing up whenever money was involved, acting entitled, as if the world owed him something. He lived on arrogance and greed. When James passed, I had a small fear in the back of my mind that Victor might try to interfere, but I brushed it aside. After all, what right would he have to my brother's estate? The lawyer, Mr. Alan Price, greeted me kindly as the will reading began. He was an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes, the kind of person who spoke only when he needed to, but when he did, every word mattered. I trusted him. As we sat down, I leaned closer and whispered, "Victor doesn't even belong here. I don't want him making a scene." Alan gave me a small smile and said, "Trust me, Caroline. If he shows up, just let him play his game. It won't end how he thinks." I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time, but those words stayed in my mind. The will reading began. Alan's voice was steady as he read James's wishes, and I felt tears prick my eyes as I heard my brother's words written on the page. He wanted me to be secure. He wanted his legacy to stay in the family, and he wanted peace. For a brief moment, I felt his presence in the room, as though he was still protecting me, even in death. And then, the door slammed open. Victor barged in, his voice cutting through the quiet room like a knife. My heart sank, because I knew what was coming. The moment Victor slammed the door open, the air in the law office changed. Everyone jumped, and the lawyer stopped mid-sentence. My stomach dropped. It was the exact scene I had hoped would never happen. Victor stood there, taller than most, with his usual smug look, his tie loosened, and his voice already raised. "I deserve my 2 million cut," he shouted before anyone could say a word. His tone wasn't just angry, it was entitled, like he had been wronged, like the money was his by birthright. I felt heat rise in my face as the room turned to me. Some family members whispered under their breath, clearly confused about why my ex-husband was even there. He had no claim to my brother's estate, but Victor was never one to let facts get in the way when money was involved. He thrived on intimidation. I stayed seated, though my hands shook under the table. Part of me wanted to stand up and tell him to leave, but I remembered what Mr. Price had told me. Let him play his game. I took a deep breath and bit my tongue. Victor walked right up to the table, slamming his hand down on the polished wood. "Don't even think about shutting me out," he said, glaring at me. "I was part of this family for 15 years. I supported James when he needed me. He wanted me to be taken care of too." The lies poured out of his mouth so easily that for a moment I almost forgot reality. James had despised Victor, had told me more than once that the man was poison. The lawyer kept his calm. "Mr. Mercer," he said firmly, "you are not listed as a beneficiary. This meeting is for family only." Victor smirked, ignoring him completely. He spotted the stack of papers in front of Alan and snatched them up like a greedy child grabbing candy. "I don't care what you say. I know there's money here, and I'm not walking away empty-handed." His eyes skimmed the papers for only a second before he picked up the pen. "Victor, don't," I said quietly, my voice breaking. But he only sneered. "What, Caroline? Scared I'm going to take what's rightfully mine? You always were too weak to stand up to me." My chest tightened. His words were knives, stabbing at old wounds from our marriage. For years I had endured his insults, his manipulations, his way of making me feel small. It was the same script, the same cruelty, just delivered in a different room. Before I could stop him, he scribbled his signature across the paper with a flourish. "There," he said loudly, tossing the pen onto the table. "I'll take my 2 million now." He leaned back, crossing his arms with a look of triumph. He thought he had won, and in his arrogance, he didn't even bother to read what he signed. Gasps spread across the room. Some of my relatives looked horrified, others confused. I kept my face still, though inside my heart was racing. I wanted to scream, to tell him he had just sealed his own fate, but instead, I remembered Alan's words again. "Trust me, it won't end how he thinks." So I stayed silent. Victor turned his attention back to me, his voice dripping with mockery. "You thought you'd cut me out? Think again. I'll be the one walking away with the money, and you can enjoy your scraps." His laugh echoed through the room, cruel and arrogant. I clenched my fists in my lap, forcing myself not to react. Anger burned in my chest, but beneath it was something else. Resolve. James had known exactly who Victor was. That's why he made the arrangements the way he did. That's why Alan Price had warned me to stay calm. This wasn't my fight to win. Victor was already defeating himself. Finally, Alan spoke again, his voice calm but carrying authority. "Mr. Mercer, we will honor what you signed today. I suggest you prepare to visit the bank tomorrow to finalize the details." He closed the folder with a decisive snap, and Victor smirked like a cat who thought he had caught the mouse. Victor strutted toward the door, pausing only to look back at me. "Enjoy being second best again, Caroline. Some things never change." Then he was gone, leaving the door swinging behind him. The room was silent for a long moment. My family stared at me with wide eyes, some shaking their heads in disbelief. I kept my chin up, even though my heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Alan leaned toward me and said softly, "Do not worry. Tomorrow he'll know exactly what he signed. Let him enjoy his victory for now." I nodded slowly. There was nothing else to say. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the scene over and over, and Victor's laughter, his smug face, the way he tossed the pen like he owned the world. I should have felt powerless, but instead, I felt something I hadn't in years. Calm, because for once, I wasn't the one who would suffer from his arrogance. He had signed away everything without a second thought. And tomorrow, in front of the bank, he was going to find out exactly what that meant. That night, after the will reading, I sat at my kitchen table, long after the lights in the neighborhood had gone out. The silence in the house was heavy, but my mind was racing with Victor's voice replaying over and over. His laughter, his smug grin, his words, "I'll be the one walking away with the money." I thought about all the years I had lived under that voice, letting it chip away at my confidence. He thrived on making me feel powerless. But this time, it felt different. For the first time, I didn't have to fight him with words. I didn't need to scream, or argue, or beg someone to believe me. He had done the damage himself. Alan Price's calm voice kept echoing in my head. "Trust me, it won't end how he thinks." That reassurance was like a hand on my shoulder. James had set this up to protect me, and Victor was too arrogant to realize he had walked right into a trap. I made myself a cup of tea, but it sat untouched. My hands wrapped around the mug more for comfort than anything else. I thought about my brother. James knew Victor was greedy. He had warned me years ago when I was still married, telling me, "He'll take everything from you if you let him." I hadn't listened back then, but now I realized James had been preparing to protect me long before he was gone. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My nerves jolted me awake before the sun had even risen. I put on a simple black dress, the same one I had worn to James's funeral. It felt right to honor him as I prepared for what was about to happen. Standing in front of the mirror, I saw a woman who had been broken before, but wasn't broken now. My hair was streaked with gray, my eyes a little tired, but my back was straight. I was ready. When I arrived at the bank, Alan was already waiting in the lobby. He gave me a nod of reassurance as I walked in. "He's on his way," he said. "Don't say much. Let the papers speak for themselves." I nodded. My heart was pounding, but there was a calmness under it, like the steady rhythm of waves. This was not a battle I had to fight. It was already won. Minutes later, Victor walked through the glass doors. He was wearing his best suit, one that looked like it hadn't been pressed properly, but he carried himself like a man walking into victory. His grin stretched wide as he strutted across the lobby, his confidence filling the room. "Well, well," he said, spotting me. "Caroline, I hope you didn't spend too much time crying last night. Once I collect, maybe I'll throw you a little something. Out of pity?" He chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks like a man rehearsing for his own celebration. I didn't answer. I just held his gaze, my silence sharper than any words I could have spoken. We followed the banker into a private office. The walls were lined with shelves of files, and the air smelled faintly of paper and ink. The table in the center had a stack of folders ready, and Alan sat down across from Victor with the ease of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment. Victor wasted no time. He slapped his hand on the table. "All right, let's make this quick. I've got $2 million waiting for me." His arrogance filled every corner of the room. Alan slid a folder across the table and said calmly, "Before anything is released, we need to confirm yesterday's paperwork." Victor smirked and leaned forward, already reaching for the folder. "Of course, it's my money, after all." He opened it, scanning quickly as his grin remained fixed on his face. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, watching him. He didn't know yet. He hadn't read far enough, but he was about to. Alan cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, I suggest you take a careful look at what you signed." His tone was firm, professional, but there was an edge to it, the kind of edge that cut sharper than a blade. Victor's eyes flicked down the page. His smirk wavered for the first time. He blinked, then leaned closer, reading the words again, slower this time. His mouth opened slightly, and the color began to drain from his face. "What is this?" he muttered, his voice losing its confidence. Alan's voice stayed steady. "What you signed yesterday was a renunciation, a legal document stating that you give up any and all claims to James Mercer's estate. By signing your name, you forfeited everything." The silence in the room was thick. Victor stared at the page, his hand gripping the paper so tightly his knuckles turned white. His lips moved as if he wanted to argue, but no words came out. He looked up at me then, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. For once in my life, I didn't feel small under his gaze. I felt strong. I didn't have to say a word. His own greed had destroyed him. The moment Alan said the word renunciation, it felt like the entire room froze. Victor's smirk evaporated, leaving behind a man stripped of the arrogance he had walked in with. His eyes darted across the paper, desperate to find a loophole, a line that would save him. His lips moved as he whispered the words to himself, as though rereading them could somehow change their meaning. But no matter how many times he scanned the page, the truth did not bend. "You tricked me," he finally snapped, his voice shaking. The anger was there, but it was laced with panic, and that panic gave him away. His hands trembled as he slammed the paper back on the table. Alan leaned back in his chair, unbothered. "No one tricked you, Mr. Mercer. You signed of your own free will. You took the papers, ignored my warnings, and scribbled your name without even reading. That was your choice." Victor's eyes narrowed, and he turned to me, the old venom back in his gaze. "You planned this," he hissed. "You set me up." I finally spoke, my voice steady. "No, Victor, you set yourself up. James knew exactly who you were. He knew you'd come charging in, demanding something that wasn't yours. He trusted that your greed would be your undoing. And he was right. The color drained even further from his face. He looked cornered, like a wolf that had finally been trapped in its own snare. For years, he had been the one holding the power over me, twisting my words, mocking me, making me feel small. But here, in this quiet office, the roles were reversed. He was the one shrinking, and I was the one standing taller, without even moving from my chair. The banker, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat and looked at Victor with professional detachment. "Mr. Mercer, legally, you have no claim to the estate. Everything belongs to Miss Mercer, as outlined in the will and confirmed by the document you signed yesterday. There's nothing more we can do for you." Victor's jaw clenched. He shot up from his chair and began pacing the room like a caged animal. His fists tightened at his sides, and for a moment, I thought he might explode. But instead of fire, what came out of him was something I had never seen before. Fear. "What am I supposed to do now?" he muttered, his voice cracking. He looked less like the confident man who had stormed into the will reading, and more like a desperate child who had just lost his toy. I stood slowly, smoothing the skirt of my black dress, and picked up my purse. My movements were calm, deliberate, and I could feel his eyes following me. I turned to face him, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to look him directly in the eye. "You could have read the papers," I said firmly. "You could have listened. You could have respected James's memory, but you didn't. You never respected anyone but yourself, and now you've lost everything." Alan gathered the documents neatly into his folder, snapping it shut. "This matter is concluded," he said with finality. "Mr. Mercer, if you have further questions, I suggest you seek private counsel. But it won't change the outcome." Victor stood there frozen, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. For once, he had no words left to twist, no insults to throw, no false charm to lean on. He was completely undone by his own arrogance. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Just before leaving, I glanced back one final time. He was still staring at the paper, as if staring hard enough might rewrite it, but reality had already spoken. At the doorway, I said the words I had been holding in for years. "James never wanted you to have a penny. And now, you never will." With that, I stepped out into the hallway. The air felt lighter, almost fresh, as though the weight of years had finally lifted off my chest. For so long, I had lived under Victor's shadow, believing his voice when he told me I wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or worthy enough. But standing there, walking out of that bank with everything intact, and my dignity finally restored, I knew the truth. The truth was that he had lost because of who he was, and I had won not because of revenge, but because I refused to stoop to his level. My brother had trusted me, the lawyer had guided me, and Victor had destroyed himself. As I stepped out into the sunlight, the city street buzzing around me, I held my head high. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was free. Walking out of the bank that day, I felt like I had stepped into a new life. The sun was shining brightly, people were rushing past me on the street, and yet everything seemed to move in slow motion. For years, I had been the woman living in Victor's shadow, doubting myself, carrying the weight of his insults and manipulations. But now, in one sharp moment of truth, the balance had shifted. The power was gone from his hands, and it would never return. That night, I sat at my dining room table with the legal documents stacked neatly in front of me. The estate was mine. James had entrusted me with everything he had built, and now I had the responsibility of honoring his memory. I thought about my brother's kindness, his way of giving without expecting anything in return. He would never have wanted his legacy tarnished by greed, and I promised myself that I would use what he left behind wisely. I called my parents later that evening, and when I told them what had happened, they were silent for a moment before my mother finally said, "James always believed in you, Caroline. This was his way of making sure you believed in yourself too." Her words sank deep into me. For so long, I had let Victor define who I was, but James had seen the real me, the strong, steady sister who deserved peace and respect. Over the next few weeks, I received messages from extended family members who had heard the story. Some of them admitted they had once believed Victor's lies, that I was weak or incapable, but now they saw the truth. The story spread quietly, but everywhere it went, it carried the same message. Arrogance destroys itself, and patience has its reward. Victor, on the other hand, disappeared from my life. For once, he didn't come banging on my door or calling me with threats. Word was that he tried to consult another lawyer, but there was nothing anyone could do for him. He had signed his rights away with his own hand. That was the end of it. From then on, the silence from him became the sweetest sound I had ever known. I decided not to use James's estate for myself alone. Part of it went into a fund in his name, supporting causes he cared about. Scholarships for young people, community programs for families in need. It felt like the right way to keep his spirit alive. Every time I signed a check in his name, I could almost hear him teasing me, saying, "See, sis, you're stronger than you think." Through it all, I kept reflecting on the lesson hidden in the chaos. For years, I had thought strength meant standing up and shouting back at Victor, meeting his fire with fire. But in the end, strength came from something else. It came from patience. It came from trusting myself, from trusting that truth would stand on its own, even if I stayed quiet. Victor's downfall wasn't caused by me fighting him. It was caused by him being exactly who he was: greedy, reckless, careless. And the lesson I want to leave with anyone listening is this: you don't always have to fight to prove your worth. Sometimes the best thing you can do is hold your ground, stay calm, and let the truth rise to the surface. Because the truth has a way of shining brighter than any lie. Now, when I walk into that same dining room where I once felt small, I don't see weakness anymore. I see a woman who survived, who endured, and who finally came out stronger. I see a woman who was underestimated, dismissed, and pushed aside, only to rise when it mattered most. And every time I look at the papers that bear James's name, I smile, because I know he would be proud. In the end, Victor walked away with nothing, and I walked away with everything that mattered: my brother's gift, my dignity, and my freedom. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this, and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts.